Hey, how you doing? Good to have you here. As always, welcome back to the channel. So this week, I want to continue talking about the Australian biker wars. You know, I did that video last week talking about all the incidents that happened around the late 2000s that changed the Australian MC scene and tattooing. This week, I want to talk to you about the changing of the guard. These new members that were coming into the club at the end of the 2000s that brought about a lot of these changes. They were the ones who were involved in all these incidents. Who am I talking about? The Nike bikies, yeah. So let's talk about it today. I'm gonna share some stories about the old school and the new school. Sound good? All right, let's get into it. So I've been around the outlaw world for many, many years. You know, I grew up with it. I grew up idolizing outlaw bikers. As a teen, I fantasized about being a biker. I watched all the movies like Easy Rider, Take a load off, and Hell's Angels 69, Hell's Angels Forever, and Stone, that Aussie classic. And I read all the magazines, and I used to go and hang out at the Harley shop and sit there and dream about owning a Harley one day. And all the old school bikers are like, look at these young punk kids. My introduction to tattooing was through an outlaw biker. It was an old friend of my mother's who gave me a whole bunch of tattoo magazines because he wanted me to draw some tattoo designs for him. When I first got those magazines and opened them up, like, these are old school biker tattoo magazines. It opened up a whole new world to me. I was seeing all these photos of big old bearded, big bellied bikers and covered in tattoos and all their women. But then I saw their lifestyle, freedom that they had, the freedom to go wherever they wanted, riding their bikes, riding with their brothers and partying all the time. And then I settled in Australia and I ended up working for an MC-owned tattoo studio. I started going to the clubhouse on Friday nights, going in and partying. And yeah, there are a lot of these old school outlaw bikers that I idolized in my teens. Some of the original guys of the club, some of the founding members of the club in Australia. It was great being able to hang out with these guys and talk about the old school and their way of life and their bikes. Because these guys, they rode, they lived to ride and ride to live. It was always that kind of atmosphere, you know, where all these guys who love bikes, love that way of life, would come together on a Friday night, have a few beers, you know, have a couple of this and have some fun, play some pool. I really got into that, and I made a lot of friends with these guys. I tattooed a lot of them, of course, and most of the work that they got were the old school tattoos. You know, it was Harley symbols and skulls of flames, and I wasn't really that into it as far as styles go, but I enjoyed tattooing these guys. They would come in and we'd spend hours just hanging out of the studio, and it was like a private party in the studio, and then we'd tattoo. I'd go up to the clubhouse on Friday night and the guy that I just tattooed was there, and he'd be buying me drinks and shouting me this and that, and we'd have a great time. And I really loved it. I gained a lot of respect for these guys because these guys fit the image of the outlaw biker that I'd grown up with. And they were genuine, down-to-earth guys. Once you get past the facade of the, you know, the big staunch biker, they were really cool guys with big hearts. And I really appreciated that too. But you know, these old school bikers were a bit of a dying breed, you know. A lot of them were retiring or gone in different directions, or some of them had actually died, you know. Some of them peacefully in their sleep. You know, there were some old guys in the club. So membership started dwindling a little bit, you know, and this is, you know, around the time when I actually got asked to patch in, and I turned it down. But a lot of new guys were coming into the club because they needed to fill their ranks a little bit. And these guys were different. They were younger, and a lot of them were Eastern European, mostly Serbian and Croatian, and they had a different mindset. Now, most of these guys, they love to party and they love being at the clubhouse, but there was a bit of separation between the old school and the new school guys. Sure, they're all brothers, you know, and they would party together and they'd ride together. But these newer guys weren't so much about that life. They loved to party in different ways. I was into the rave scene at the time, and so were these guys. Quite often, after Friday night club, we would go into the valley, and someone would be handing out some pills, someone would be handing out some powder. and we'd just go get on it, and we'd go listen to all this doof music and just have a great time. Now, most of these guys, because they're up and coming in the club, they wanted to really be the big guys. They wanted to be the prominent figures. They weren't old school, so, you know, they didn't have the beards and the tattoos or anything like that. They were clean cut, and they would go out to the nightclubs, so they would wear fashionable clothing, you know, Versace and Gucci and all that, because these guys had money. Now, a lot of these Eastern European guys had connections to the old school European families, and they're all about making money and showing it off. They're all covered in gold, and everything was designer. And even some of their bikes, which most of them didn't really ride that often, and I kind of dug it, you know, it wasn't all about the fashion stuff, you know, I'm a t-shirt and jeans kind of guy always, you know. I did get into the gold a little bit, you know, at one stage I had gold rings on every finger, a big gold chain, bracelets, all that kind of stuff, because I wanted to be a part of this life. And, you know, these guys were my friends, and I really clicked with them because we're all around about the same age. But then as their numbers grew, things started to change. And there was a lot of back and forth between the old school and the new school guys. They all had different directions they wanted to take the club in. Now, I wasn't privy to a lot of it, you know, especially club business, had nothing to do with me, but I could sense it. You know, there was a real divide. So these new guys started a chapter down the Gold Coast, and they took all these newer guys with them. Now, like I said, most of them are Eastern European, but there was even a couple of Middle Eastern guys who had become hang-arounds and started hanging out with the club. Now, I got on fine with them, you know, but they all moved down and formed this Gold Coast chapter. Of course, I followed them, you know, even when I wasn't living down there, I would go and party with them every weekend. And I had my 30th birthday at the Gold Coast Clubhouse because these guys were all like, come on, bro, let's have a party. And, you know, it'd be an awesome night, and it turned into an awesome weekend. You know? And I tattooed all these guys as well. So all these newer guys were coming to me constantly. You know, the president was a good friend of mine, and I tattooed him from day one. And of course, all these guys wanted to get tattooed by me as well. But they were different when it came to their tattoos. Now, many of them didn't have a lot of tattoo coverage, not like the old school guys. Now, most of them, especially at that time, you know, wanted like full sleeves and backs, and they all wanted kind of like, you know, European style with crosses or gangster. You know, they love the Chicano style. So they would get like, you know, the masks and the script and all that kind of stuff, but none of it was really club related. None of it was bike related, that's for sure. But then when I moved down to the Gold Coast, I really saw it changing a lot. A lot of these Middle Eastern guys that were hanging around became prospects, and then eventually they patched in with the club. They had connections to a lot of underworld, and some of these guys who came into it came in from Middle Eastern street gangs. One of them is Notorious, and another one was Soldiers of Islam. They started recruiting heavily because they wanted to dominate the Gold Coast, and I talked about it in my last video. There were already dominant clubs on the Gold Coast, and there was this rivalry kicking off. And the club I was with was no different. They all wanted to be the big men on the block. It's always the way with many, many clubs all around the world. Someone moves into an area, they're going to try and take over. For whatever reason they need to take over, they'll do it. So they needed numbers, but they also needed numbers with connections. That's where a lot of these guys came into it. Now, it wasn't about being a biker. None of these guys would talk about their bikes. You know, they wouldn't sit there at the clubhouse on a Friday night talking about bikes or going on this ride or going for runs or nationals or anything like that. There was none of that talk. A lot of the time it was just about, you know, what we're partying on, where we're partying at, who we're going to party with, all that kind of stuff. That's pretty much all the conversations that I had with them anyway. And then, of course, it was the tattoos, you know. Now, these guys, when it came to getting tattooed, you know, they weren't like the old school guys. The old school guys would sit there and they would take it. Even if it hurt, they weren't going to show you. Not a chance. They would just sit there and suck it up. A lot of these newer guys, it was a different story. Like, you know, the vice president, it took him 3 sessions just to get an outline of a cross on his back. Because, oh man, this guy just complained every time I put the needle to his skin. I was like, oh, jeepers. Give me the old school guys any day. for many of these guys, if it wasn't for the club, they probably wouldn't even get tattooed. And then, of course, once they started really trying to establish themselves, and like I said, with all the rivalry, that's when these incidents started. And there was a lot of back and forth incidents, you know, between clubs. A lot of it didn't get reported on. Locals knew what was going on. There was a lot of tit for tat stuff. And there was a lot of dodgy dealings going on. This person's ripping off this person. And that's when I went, oh, you know what? This is turning into something that I didn't sign up for. As I've said, you know, I idolized the old school bikers and that way of life. And before I knew it, I was ending up getting dragged into this whole scene that I just didn't recognize, didn't want to be a part of. You know, all these young guys were dressy and flashy and all about being powerful and money and cars and girls and gold and Nikes. And that was it for me, you know. When I first experienced it, it was one of the Gold Coast bike weeks. We all went en masse, and most of these guys were wearing shorts and Nike shoes while riding their bikes. And they had the Yves Saint Laurent or the Louis Vuitton bum bags draped over their shoulders. I'm like, wow, that's not how it used to be. I'm used to seeing these old school bikers covered in grease, ripped up t-shirt, greasy jeans, you know, this vest that they've always worn, never washed, you know, but they were so proud of it, you know, and that was kind of like what I knew about bikers. Me standing next to a guy who's spent more money on body waxing and facials than he has on anything. Not my kind of people at all. I had started moving away from the club at that time anyway. I started hanging around with the skinhead gang, and so I was gravitating towards that. And in hindsight, for me, it was probably a way of getting away from all these Nike bikies and the direction that it was going in. Just before the big incident that happened on the coast, the Broad Beach bikie brawl that I talked about in my last...
We're ready to start something.
I had become a full patch member with the skinhead gang that I was with. So I was pretty much, you know, I was away from it, I was done with it. But I was still tattooing for my friend, the president of the Gold Coast chapter. He owned a studio in Brisbane and I worked for him. But I also tattooed another president. Now, he was a good friend of mine and, you know, he was a client for quite a while. He opened a central chapter in Brisbane and he was inviting me down. Every time he come in to get tattooed, he's like, bro, when you coming down to the club, you know? I'm like, oh, you know, not really my scene anymore, you know, I won't come down. He's like, no, just come down, check out the clubhouse, come down one night. Oh, okay. So I went down this one Friday, they were having a bit of a party. So I went down to the club, checked out the clubhouse, and I walked in and I was like, wow, okay, yeah, it's a pretty cool, decent clubhouse. And then I started looking at all these members. Now, I didn't recognize anyone. You know, they're all new guys to me. You know, there was quite a few full patch members and there was a lot of prospects and, you know, quite a few supporters. Oh, well, it's actually, you know, decent sized numbers, especially for a new chapter. And then I noticed that not many of them were actually white Australians, you know, and most, they definitely didn't look like bikers. They definitely didn't look like the old school bikers that I knew, not even close. They're all wearing designer stuff. They're all wearing Nikes. They all had the bum bags. I'm like, wow, this is kind of crazy, you know, and it's definitely not what I expected. Definitely wasn't the outlaw biker world that I knew. You know, all of these old school guys are gone. And in fact, a lot of them from these chapters had moved on. A lot of the old school guys just didn't like the direction that it was going in. They didn't want to be a part of it. You know, sure, a lot of them were all about making money and, you know, living life their way and, you know, being involved in a few deals here and there. But these guys were just focused on money and power and any way they could get it. And that wasn't what these old school bikers were about. Now, in the later years, these guys, the Nike bikies, became the majority in this club and in many, many clubs. And they pushed a lot of these old school guys out. Yeah, a lot of them ended up having to retire from the club. I just saw it all just going crazy. And then all these incidents started happening. And I kept a watch of it over the years. You know, I've always stayed in touch. You know, I stayed in touch with quite a few of the members that I was friends with from the beginning. And yeah, it is definitely not the same world that they started in. It's all changed. And a lot of what you see on the news today, all these crazy incidents, all these, massive busts, drug busts, importation, all this kind of stuff, it's this new generation of bikers, It's definitely a changed world. And, to be honest, it's a shame, because the outlaw biker world, the original one percenters, it was part of our history. It was a culture that so many people wanted to be a part of, not because they wanted to be criminals, not because they wanted to be gangsters, but because they really wanted to be a part of that life, the free life, the ones that lived outside of societal rules, gave the middle finger to the government and the police and everyone else and said, fuck you, I am gonna live my way and I'm gonna live with my brothers who believe the same way, and we're gonna stand together and we're gonna fight together, and no matter what, no one is gonna take this life from us, no one's gonna take our patch from us. And I know for so many out there, they all feel the same way. So I'm really glad that I got to spend some years, with that scene, with the MC, and I got to experience a lot of the old school outlaw biker lifestyle. I have great memories of those guys, of the runs, of the parties, all of that kind of stuff that I attended, and they'll always stay with me, always have respect for that old school way of life. And as they said back in the day, FTW. And if you know, you know. So that's it for another week. Thanks so much for being here. As always, I really appreciate your support. And, if you want to support me in other ways, always appreciate that. You can give us a like, super likes, or you can buy merchandise, buy me a coffee. All the links are in the description below. But as always, if you really want to support the channel, just give us a big like. And if you're new here, and there's a little button below, you hit that, subscribe, and hit the little bell to get notified, and you'll be seeing new videos from me every Thursday and Sunday night. Sound good? Peace out, everyone. Live to ride, ride to live.